video online talking about Travis picking techniques, a simple way of just sort of developing the patterns around this kind of picking style. And so what I thought I'd do this week, just for a change, is to see if I can adapt that, show you a few more ideas that you can work with these type of picking patterns and see if we can take it to the next level. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to start to introduce some left-hand techniques alongside the right-hand Travis picking techniques as well. So if you haven't seen that original video or you're not really comfortable with this style of picking yet, you should go and check my original video out, work through that, just get used to these kinds of shapes first. And then you can come back to this and see if you can take it to the next step. So the first thing I'll do is I'll just introduce you to a couple of basic picking ideas, some simple patterns that we're going to work on firstly across a couple of chords. So I'm just going to stay, when I introduce the concepts, I'm just going to work around the chord A minor. And then afterwards, in the second half, what I'll do is I'll work through a whole series of different open string chords, major chords, minor chords, and show you how you can adapt these kinds of approaches depending on the chord that you're playing over and depending on the picking technique that you want to use. Okay, so let's start with the first technique. Okay, so the first technique I want to talk about is using hammer-ons as part of the picking pattern. So let me see if I can demonstrate. And obviously this is just a simple pattern. You can start using this alongside all of the other patterns as well, or you can just sort of pick the speed up. Has a nice kind of gallop sound to it in itself. Anyway, let's zoom in and I'll see if I can demonstrate exactly what I'm doing here. Okay, so this first technique can be a little bit fiddly. It can take a little while to get bedded into your hands, but the more you do it, the more you'll be able to do it. It's a bit like kind of patting your head and rubbing your stomach, to be honest with you, when you first start, but you know, stick with it, persevere, and you will get there. So if you remember, the pattern looks a bit like this. I've got an A minor chord on. And what I'm doing is this kind of pattern. So my right hand then is going thumb, thumb, index, thumb, thumb, index. You see that? Then my left hand just has that A minor chord on, and I hold that A minor chord on, and then I release my second finger, so I play an open D, and then hammer onto that E to create that sound. Hammer on, hammer on. That's the pattern. And as we change chords, we've used different fingers to hammer on. But the basic approach is just the same, irrespective of the chord that you play. Hopefully you can see that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is to start to think about a melody line. I'm going to show you how to bring out a melody line that you can play while you're playing this accompaniment, something like this. And obviously the line that you pick is going to need to suit the song that you're playing, but what you tend to find is there are a whole series of sort of safe notes that you can use against different chords, and if you learn these to start with, this gives you a good grounding, and then you can start to experiment as you play different songs. So let's zoom in and we'll show you the basic technique. Okay, so where we're going to start with the second section is, again, I've got this A minor chord on, and we're going to use one of the basic patterns that we discovered in the previous video, which is this. So what I'm doing is I'm just alternating between my thumb and a finger, thumb, finger, thumb, finger, thumb, finger. And you can kind of see the first two notes are the outer parts of the shape, so the lowest note and the highest note, and then an in-between note with the thumb again, and another in-between note with the finger. So outer, inner, outer, inner. Yeah? And now what we're going to do is we're going to start to introduce that melody line. And the way we do that is that outer highest note, that note, is the one that we're going to use to bring out the melody line. So you go thumb, outer note, which will carry the melody, then thumb, inner note. And this is where we start to introduce the left hand. So the left hand just changes that outer note. Can you see that? Yeah. So the only note that I'm really changing is that highest note that I play. Okay, so we've got a couple of techniques, and they kind of all vary a little bit depending on the chord that you're playing over. So what I thought I'd do now is to show you how I use them over very simple chords like C, F, G, E, A, D, then E minor, A minor, D minor, and I'll show you how I vary the technique as I play over these different chords. So let's zoom in and we'll have a go at that now. Okay, so let's start with C major. There's our chord, and what we're going to do is see which note to do the hammer-on process with to start with. And it's very similar actually to the A minor chord that we focused on before. So the thumb bounces between that C note and that G note, and then we hammer on between the D and the E. And that's the easiest way of using this technique over C major. Okay. Now the second technique, where we bring out the melodies, the thing really to do is to just explore with it, but you'll find that the best notes to use when you're playing over C major are going to be the C note, the D note, which is a tone higher, 2 frets higher, the open E string, and the G string. I feel like those are the safe notes. Okay, so let's look at F. F, we're just going to play the top 4 strings, which means everything's kind of a bit more bunched together than you have when you play C or G. So we're just going to focus on those top 4 strings. Just like before though, when we do the hammer-on technique, what we'll do is play that low note, the F, and then C with the thumb, and then hammer on with the G to A on the G string. Otherwise, it's the same pattern as we had before. And when I bring out the melody in this, I tend to only, if I'm playing safe, I tend to only play the top E string. And so I'm either going to be playing that F or the G above it on the 3rd fret with my little finger. Depending on the key of the music, you can lift your first finger off and play the open E string, creates an F major 7th chord. But if you like, the F and the G tend to be the 2 safest notes that you can play. So G then. So G, what I'll do is I'll stick to the lowest strings, certainly with the hammer-on technique. So I'll play thumb and then open D, and hammer on on the A string, open A, 2nd fret on the A string. So very similar to F and C. When I'm bringing out the melody for this, you have many more notes that you can actually work with. And the notes I tend to play are these. So there's the open G, the A, the B, the D, the E and the G. So you've got a lot of freedom when you're playing over that G chord. Okay, so the A chord. Now my own preference when I'm playing the A is to put a little kind of a triangle on the second fret, and that just allows my fingers to kind of bunch there. So my second finger is on the E note there, my first finger is behind the second finger there, and then my third finger plays that top note. So it's kind of a little triangle. And when I do that hammer-on approach, what I'm doing again is hammering on my second finger on that D to E. And when I'm bringing out the melody, the notes that I tend to use are the C sharp there, take my third finger off to play a B, the open E, and then the F sharp, which is using my third finger on that second fret of the E string. So those tend to be the notes that I'll use if I'm bringing out a melody. Okay, so D then. So when I'm playing a D, what I'll do is I'll use my index finger to hammer on between the open G and hammer on to the A. And from a melody point of view, again, we're kind of all stuck on the higher notes. So my melody line tends to just stay to that top E string. So what I'll do is I'll put my little finger on the third fret, use the F sharp, or take the F sharp off to play an E. And that gives me my melody notes. Okay, moving on to E major then. And just like before, that second finger is the finger that I use to do the hammer-ons with. And I'm hammering on from the A to the B. Hopefully you can see that. And then when I bring the melody out, my melody line is really driven by my little finger, so I'll either play the G sharp, the A that's a fret above, the open B, the C sharp, the E, the F sharp. So you can see my little finger just moves up and down that second fret. A minor then. So we focused on A minor in the first part of the video, so hopefully you remember it's that second finger hammering on, creating that sound. And when I'm playing melody lines, what I'm doing is I'm playing the C, the D, which is the third fret on the B string, the open E, or the third fret of the G string. And that gives me my notes that I can play. Yeah, try D minor. So D minor, we hammer on with the second fret just like before. So So it's that second finger hammering on from the G to the A. Otherwise the movement's pretty much like before. A melody, I tend to just stick between the F and the G and maybe take my finger off for the E. So E minor then. Again, just like before, it's that second finger doing the hammer on between the A and the B on that 5th fret, on that 5th string rather. Gives you that sound. And when I start to play melodies, I tend to bring them out with my little finger again, and they'll be sort of open B, the D on the 3rd fret, open E, G on the 3rd fret of the E string. And you can reach down for the A, 2nd fret of the G string, open G. So you've got a reasonable array of notes that you can play. Okay, so if you combine the work that we've done in this video with the work that we did in the previous video, we've got 5 picking patterns that we can start to vary between. We can use to bring out different chord lines, we can use the hammer-ons to kind of build that momentum in there as well. So there's quite a lot you can do here, and you should be able to take it to a point where you can freely move between these patterns, freely move between the chords, and that's where the fun really starts, because you can start to really kind of improvise using these kinds of ideas as well. So explore them, have fun with them, see how you get on, and let me know if you want me to take this to yet another stage, and I quite happily will. Otherwise we'll chat next time. Goodbye.